From the House of Representatives, January 23, 2025. Message number 120. Mr. President, House Bill number 169, homeowner tax exemption 25 and 2026, passed on House on third reading in an amended form. Ayes 40, noes 20, excused 2.
Do we have a privilege of the floor yet? Where'd Vice President go? Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. Absent objection, Mr. President, I would ask that Senate File 18, landowner hunting tags amendments, be re-referred to Committee 5, Agriculture. Again, absent objection.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hearing no objection, Senate File 18 has been re-referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture.
Mr. President, that's Senate File 118.
118, and can
thank
you read the catch title again? I'm sorry, I didn't catch it.
That's landowner hunting tags amendments.
Okay, Senate File 118, Landowner Hunting Tags Amendments, has been re-referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Okay, Senator Salazar, Mr. Vice President.
Mr. President, privilege of the floor.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honorable members, we have with us, right behind the President, the senior government class from Riverton High School. The teacher is Mr. Daniel McLean, and these are really, really smart, much smarter than me, which isn't hard. But if you could give them a warm Senate welcome, appreciate it.
Senator, or Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's not often that my own alma mater, Riverton High School, is here in the chamber. Class of 2000, go Big Red. Glad to see you here. So well, great.
All right. Welcome to the Senate. All right. Any more privileges before we get to work here? Okay. Introduction, reading, and reference of bills. We are mowing through bills like crazy here. All right, Senate File 133, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 133, Protection of Parental Rights Amendments, sponsored by Senator Brennan.
Senate File 133 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate Joint Resolution 5, first reading of this joint resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 5, Congressional Term Limits, sponsored by Senator Larson.
Senate Joint Resolution 5 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 136, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 136, Homeowner Tax Exemption, sponsored by Senator Dockstader.
Senate File 136 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 150, first reading of the Senate bill.
Senate File 150, For-Profit Trade Schools Property Tax Exemption, sponsored by Senator McEwen.
Senate File 150 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 151.
Senate File 151, Monthly Ad Valorem Tax Distribution Amendments, sponsored by Senator Jones.
Senate File 151 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 153.
Senate File 153, Residential Real Property Taxable Values, sponsored by Senator Barlow.
Senate File 153 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 131.
Senate File 131, Charter School Leasing, sponsored by Senator Driscoll.
Senate File 131 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. Senate File 137.
Senate File 137, School Finance Cash Reserves, sponsored by Senator Dockstader.
Senate File 137 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. Senate Joint Resolution 3.
Senate Joint Resolution 3, commemorating Nellie Taylor Ross, sponsored by Senator Nethercott.
Senate Joint Resolution 3 is referred to Committee number 4, Education. Senate Joint Resolution 6.
Senate Joint Resolution 6, School Capital Construction Constitutional Amendment, sponsored by Senator Scott.
Senate Joint Resolution 6 is referred to Committee number 4, Education. Senate File, let me hold this one back real quick. Can I hold this one back? I just got a text from the bill sponsor on where she'd like it to go, and it's not where I put it, so we'll talk about that. Senate Joint Resolution 2.
Senate Joint Resolution 2, resolution demanding equal footing, sponsored by Senator Ide.
Senate Joint Resolution 2 is assigned to Committee number 5, Agriculture. Senate File 140.
Senate File 140, trapping education requirements, sponsored by Senator Dockstader.
Senate File 140 is assigned to Committee number 6, Travel. Senate File 139.
Senate File 139, trapping requirements, licenses, seasons, and setbacks, sponsored by Senator Dockstader.
Senate File 139 is assigned to Committee number 6, Travel. Senate File 148.
Senate File 148, fire suppression and restoration funding, sponsored by Senator Crago.
Senate File 148 is assigned to Committee number 6, Travel. Senate File 149.
Senate File 149, wildlife conservation license plates amendments, sponsored by Senator Pappas.
Senate File 149 is assigned to Committee number 6, Travel. Senate File 152.
Senate File 152, Wildfire Management Task Force and State Foresters, sponsored by Senator Barlow.
Senate File 152 is assigned to Committee number 6, Travel. Senate Joint Resolution 4.
Senate Joint Resolution 4, Resolution on Commercial Baseload Power Generation, sponsored by Senator Pearson.
Senate Joint Resolution 4 is assigned to Committee number 7, Corporations. Senate File 138.
Senate File 138, Energy Impact on Wyoming Economy Study, sponsored by Senator Dockstader.
Senate File 138 is assigned to Committee number 9, Minerals. Senate File 144.
Senate File 144, Wyoming-Ireland Trade Commission, sponsored by Senator Driscoll.
Senate File 144 is assigned to Committee number 9, Minerals. Let's see here. Senate File 132.
Senate File 132, Protecting Critical Infrastructure and Systems from Drones, sponsored by Senator Jones.
Senate File 132 is assigned to Committee number 6, Travel. Okay. All right, reports from standing committees.
Mr. President, the following reports are dated January 23, 2025. Mr. President, Committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom is referred Senate File 64, Wyoming opposes mandatory electronic ID vehicles, livestock. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Crago, French, Ide, McEwen, and Pearson. Senator French, Chairman. Mr. President, Committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom is referred Senate File 84, Country of Origin Label, USA Beef. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Crago, French, Ide, McEwen, and Pearson. Senator French, Chairman. Mr. President, Committee number 1, Judiciary, to whom is referred Senate Joint Resolution 1, Convention of States, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Crago, Crum, Hicks, Kolb, and Olson. Senator Olson, Chairman. Mr. President, Committee number 1, Judiciary, to whom is referred Senate File 104, Probate Code Revisions, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Crago, Crum, Hicks, Kolb, and Olson. Senator Olson, Chairman. Mr. President, to Committee Number 1, Judiciary, to whom is referred Senate File 10, Settlement Agreements for Minors, Parental Authorization. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Crago, Crum, Hicks, Kolb, and Olson. Senator Olson, Chairman.
Thank you, Randy. Madam Majority Floor Leader, we're at that time of business for consideration of bills on general file. Do you have a
Mr.
motion?
President, I move that the Senate resolve itself into Committee of the Whole.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. The lone no vote, please approach the desk. Senator McEwen. Good luck.
Committee of the Whole, come to order. I need to take this down to revenue. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 41. The House reading clerk will read the Senate file. Did I say House? The Senate reading clerk. It's been a long week. I should give it to you, too.
Senate File 41, Federal Acts, Legal Action Authorized, an act relating to the legislature, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee, was referred to Committee Number 5, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Crago, French, Ide, McEwen, and Pearson. Senator French, Chairman. Was re-referred to Committee Number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass fail. Ayes, Senators Grew and Larson. No, Senators Driscoll, Salazar, and Smith. Senator Salazar, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure?
Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 41 do pass. And for an explanation of this, I call on Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman French. So I'll give you a little history on this bill. It came out of the legislature as Senate File 13 a year ago. And it's a bill that we started with in Ag Committee a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago. And it all resonated from a lot of the overreach of the federal government, Rock Springs RMP, the Biden shutdown of coal leasing, the oil and gas cutting off 80, 90% of our oil leasing on federal lands. We're looking for a way for the legislature to maybe have a little more authority on issues like this. And we discovered a statute that gives the legislature standing to prosecute actions that are important to the legislature, which this is one in particular that was very important, especially in the Ag Committee. The committee is Ag, State and Federal Lands and Water Resources. So we took it upon ourselves in committee. I was fairly new. Some of the more veteran persons on that committee, we made some amendments to that statute. And the amendments address specifically into this statute federal acts that were getting violated. And I'd like to go to the statute. It's in the bill. It doesn't really read Section A, but this is why it was important. We went to LSO and said, is there any way we can find standing for the legislature to take action on these if nobody else is going to? So I'll just read this section A of this statute. It's statute 28-8-114. The legislature finds that proper interpretation and administration of the Constitution and the legislative enactments of the state of Wyoming are matters of great public interest and importance. And the legislature has a sufficient interest in the proper interpretation and administration of the Constitution and its own enactments to provide standing for the legislature to prosecute an action for declaratory judgment to protect its interest and the interest of the public. So that was subsection A of that statute, and B, C, and D are still in there. So let me walk you through the bill here real quick. Like I said before, this authorizes the legislature to prosecute actions involving the proper administration and interpretation of federal acts. So we added section B on page 2. That's the primary addition to this statute. And I'll just kind of go through it here. The legislature finds that Article 1, Section 8, and Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution recognizes the jurisdiction of the Wyoming legislature over land within the boundaries of the state of Wyoming. So I'll back up there a little bit. Those two provisions in the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 is specifically, it's referred to as the Enclave Clause. It's one of the enumerated powers of the federal government. And in that article, or in that clause of Article 1, Section 8, it says right in there that the federal government cannot purchase any land within the sovereign state of Wyoming unless they get consent from the legislature. And it's only for military purposes. Forts, arsenals, magazines, dockyards, and other needful buildings. So that's an enumerated power, really the only one that they have to even purchase land in the state of Wyoming, and it's particularly for military installations. The other one, Article 1, Section 4, deals with, admitting new states into the Union, and the admissions clause and the property clause are both in Article 4, and Section 1, or Article 1, Section 3, clause. Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 is the property clause, and that is the clause in there that mandates the federal government to dispose of our federal lands, and it's really never, that's the Utah case that they took to the Supreme Court, that they sent it back down to the district courts, but that's never been challenged. So we wanted to get this in here so we had a little foothold to, Wyoming to effectively do things like the Rock Springs RMP or the federal coal leasing ban, oil and gas leasing getting shut down on federal lands. So that was the impetus of what we were trying to do here. So not to belabor this too much, so at the bottom there, or in that section B, line 15, if you start there, that first sentence in that on line 15 says the legislature has a sufficient interest in the proper interpretation and administration of the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, the Federal Land Policy Management Act, FLPMA, the National Historic Preservation Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and other federal acts that provide standing for the legislature to prosecute actions for declaratory judgment to protect its interest and the interest of the public. This summer, in interim, and I guess I'll back up a little bit. This bill, Senate File 13, passed both chambers last year with a 75% supermajority in both chambers. And then the bill got vetoed by the governor. So we brought it back up during interim committee, and in interim, we just kind of cleaned things up a little bit from the old bill. And then there was amendment that was brought during interim that we'll go to on the next page 3. And that subsection C says the legislature by a majority vote of the members of both houses when in session, or the management council, as a good senator from Campbell County mentioned in our caucus today, or the Management Council by the affirmative vote of, the old statute said 2/3, and we amended that this summer in interim to a simple majority, 50%. So that was one of the amendments we made this summer that kind of cleaned up the bill from last year and made it a little easier for the Management Council to move forward to prosecute. Other than that, line 12 down on page 3 refers to administrative rules and federal acts, including federal land purchases of land within the state of Wyoming. Legislature shall have standing and may use funds for litigation purposes in accordance with subsection F of this section to prosecute actions for declaratory judgment. So to kind of just finish this up, like I said before, we just need a little more horsepower in the legislature, and this gives it to us, this statute, and specifically to fight the federal lands, which is 47% of our state within our boundaries and 70% of our mineral estate. And I think it's a real important bill. That's why it passed by 2 supermajorities in both chambers. And let's see, what else have I got here? So this, the do pass fail in appropriations, we kind of got tripped up there a little bit. So with that, I guess I would like to read in the amendment that we made to the appropriation in this. And I'll back up before you read it in. The bill had a $75 million appropriation when we got it out of here, and then there was amendment made in the committee, the standing committee here, which kind of threw a little monkey wrench into things. And we amended that 75 million, and I'll have the good clerk read that in right now. Thank you.
Will the reading clerk read the amendment?
Senate File 41, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 6, after.
So I'm a little rusty at this, but I move a Standing Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 41 and ask for your favorable consideration. So basically, all we're doing here, we're taking that $75 million down to $10 million, and it can be used for, excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, I think my colleague is on the committee of the whole amendment. There's also a standing committee amendment. Normal process is dispose of any standing committee amendments or you go to the committee of the whole.
I thought that's what.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, on the point of order, there is a standing committee amendment number 1, and there's a committee of the whole amendment number 2. Normal process is to dispose of the standing committee amendment and then the committee of the whole amendment. And so I think my colleague, while he had moved the standing committee amendment, was speaking to the committee of the whole amendment.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator from Baggs. I wasn't quite sure how we were going to deal with that, but I'm ready to. Basically, what I would like to do is withdraw Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 41 and ask for your favorable consideration. And what that means effectively is we would eliminate that $75 million appropriation, go to that. Yes.
Senator Ide, you cannot withdraw that. It's a standing committee amendment.
Oh.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the standing committee amendment belongs to the standing committee. And as the sponsor of the legislation, you're not responsible for the standing committee amendment. The chairman of the standing committee or one of the members of the standing committee is responsible for it. So with the order needing to be the standing committee prior to the committee of the whole, I think it would be in order to debate or discuss the bill and then perhaps invite the standing committee member to rise, and the chairman can recognize to work through standing committee amendment number 1, and then if committee of the whole, it looks like you're a co-sponsor of that, that would be appropriate for you to then work afterwards. But the standing committee, and we get confused on this sometimes, the standing committee amendment belongs to the standing committee. And if the standing committee is, for example, appropriations, then you need to defer to the appropriations committee, allow them to stand up and represent it. The prime sponsor does not have the obligation and in fact shouldn't be representing the interests of the committees that bring those amendments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Smith.
I think those of us that are new to the Senate don't understand what was just said completely. So who exactly is on the standing committee for this bill?
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to clear this up. So the way it works is when you are on a committee, your committee takes an action which requires a vote of that committee. So the Agriculture Committee voted on the Standing Committee Amendment. That's the Standing Committee Amendment. In order, you can't just then reverse a vote of the committee by withdrawing that. Does that make sense so far? And so that requires the body, then when the bill comes to the body as a whole, we have to take action on that amendment. Now, the chairman may stand up and ask us to vote no on the amendment if he so chooses, or take an action like that, but the body has to dispose of the amendment. Then it is in order to bring personal amendments to the bill. And that is how the process works. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator French.
Yes, as chairman of the Ag Committee, I ask that the body vote no on this standing committee amendment number 1. Move it, please. I'd like to move it.
You did move it. Senator Hicks.
Just an inquiry, is the standing committee one been read in? It has been read in. All right, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. So it would be in order for the chairman to ask for the Senate to vote no.
Senator French, continue.
I ask that the body vote no on this amendment.
Are you ready for? Senator Colt.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I get an explanation by the chairman of the committee that wanted us to vote no on it, so I understand how that came about, considering it came out of the committee and now they don't want us to vote for the said amendment. So I'd like to hear why from the chairman.
Senator French.
I'll do my best. This was an interim, joint ag interim bill. That's where it originated. And there was appropriated the $75 million for this, so Management Council could take legal action if they felt necessary, to the tune of the $75 million. When it got here, it was referred to Senate Committee number 2, Appropriations. They took out the $75 million. So we're back here. I believe the vote was 3-2. So now we're back here in, that's why I asked where it's an amendment that we take it out.
Senator Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll try to do my best to help since I am on that committee as well. So as the bill is originally drafted, it essentially creates some borrowing authority. And we might need a little bit of help from our good appropriators that handle all of our money, because they might be able to help us explain this a little bit better. But the way I understand it is The amendment actually came to us from staff because I think there was some concern from staff that we weren't actually putting the money in the right place so that we could actually use it for litigation purposes. And so what the amendment, standing committee amendment does is actually create an appropriation to LSO so that we can spend that money if we need it. And so I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the motion or with the recommendation of our good chairman to not adopt the amendment, simply because without it, I'm not sure how that all works now. Someone who's been on committee number 2 can maybe help me out a little bit, but until I hear otherwise, I'm not sure we're gonna have the money there to do what we want to do if we defeat the standing committee amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Wright.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my 2 colleagues here from the Ag Committee kind of summed it up. I'm not fully opposed to leaving that in there. It just, the way it came out of appropriations kind of tripped us up here and wasn't quite sure how to handle it. And I'm not real astute on dealing with a situation like this. So I really don't have a problem, I guess, necessarily with the standing committee amendment. It failed in appropriations. So we're looking for a way to navigate that and get something back in here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'm confused at this point. Normally, if the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Chairman, changes an appropriation, takes it out of something, we see an Appropriations Committee amendment because they do not have unilateral power. None of us do. It has to come back to the full Senate. And maybe I'm just missing it, but I don't see an Appropriations Committee amendment here. Mr. Chairman, I'm more than a little confused as to where we are.
Me too, Senator Scott. Senator Hicks.
Yeah.
Oh.
Mr. President, maybe what we might want to do is stand at ease to the sound of the gavel, and then we can work this out and maybe come back and have some answers for the floor. That might be in order if you were so inclined.
Can we lay it back? Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill was referred to the committee number 2, and I'm sorry, the chair and the vice chair just happened to be off the floor, and I can just tell you what I recall, is that we discussed the appropriation, and we too were split of different minds on it. Frankly, I'll explain my vote. I voted to send it down with the 75 million to have the discussion amongst the wider body. Others disagreed. I think that some wanted to do it because they were for it. Some wanted to do it for the wider discussion. Others voted no. And so I too was kind of surprised by the vote. I thought it would come down with some appropriation, but the way it turned out, it was 3-2 to send it back without an appropriation attached. So we turned down the appropriation that was there.
Senator Smith.
I'm going to follow my sword here. I'm for this bill. I would have voted for it. I don't know if you've ever had a vote you wish you could take back. That's never happened to anybody here, right? Anyway, bottom line, I saw the 75 million and we had a lot going on, and I slipped a cog. I would have been for this, so I bet you we can figure out, I'm sure my sense is the majority in the Appropriations Committee would be for this bill if we could go back and redo it. So if we need to bring an amendment from the Appropriations Committee, then that'd be the next step, maybe.
Senator French.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to lay this back for one day.
Without objection. Senator Case.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, but the point of order would be that we're in committee of the whole now. So we can lay this bill back, but it's going to be up to the majority floor leader to decide when we listen to this bill again, because the majority floor leader controls the order of bills on general file. So, but it'll be fine. It absolutely is fine. Just ask that it be, and be laid back, or it'd be better to have a motion on this one, I think, because we're in committee of the whole. Just motion to lay it back and it'll show.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, you can frankly do it either way.
Sure.
You can ask to be laid back one day, you can ask to be laid back, and just generally, and then the majority leader has discretion. You can move it be laid back, or you can move it be laid back to a time specific. So you have a range of options in front of you. And I don't know which, Mr. Chairman, would be better. I think maybe giving the majority floor leader discretion would be better, because it sounds like the Appropriations Committee took an action that would require an amendment, and we don't have an amendment. So there's a problem here.
To the point of order, I think we had this discussion, Mr. Chairman, the other day. We looked at the rules, and the rules do say that we can put it down, but the majority floor leader still decides when we take it up again. And I think Senator Rothfuss brought that the other day.
Senator French.
I'm going to try this again. Absent objection, I ask that this be laid back one day.
Without prejudice. Right. Just a minute. Senator French, I think we have to have the majority floor leader decide when it comes back out after it gets laid back, because it gets laid back without prejudice. Can I lay this back now? Senator Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this would be more of a point of inquiry for the good parliamentarians in the body. We do have a pending motion, and how is that dealt with in the record when we lay a bill back during a pending motion?
Senator Rothfuss.
On the point of order, so for general file, the motion would be just, or excuse me, not the motion, the request for the ease would be just to lay it back without prejudice. That goes back on the general file. Majority leader handles that. As far as the fact that there's a motion on the floor, laying it back is a precedential motion, so it is a higher level motion. So even though there isn't a motion to amend, which is the motion that's on the floor right now, the motion to lay it back is a higher standing motion. So it wins out, and it is in order to make it now without needing to withdraw.
Do we have to vote on this, Alan? Senator French.
Civics 101. I ask that it be laid back on general file without prejudice.
Without objection, Senate File 41 has been laid back. Be afraid, be very afraid. Okay, the next file up for consideration is Senate File 73. The reading clerk will read in the Senate file. You got me all discombobulated.
Senate File 73, Charter School Funding Amendments, an act relating to charter schools, sponsored by Senator Brennan, was referred to Committee Number 4, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Brennan, Olson, Rothfuss, Schuler, and Scott. Senator Schuler, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Schuler.
Am I good? It must be lunch, because I will move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with the recommendation that Senate file, I lost the number, 76. Do pass.
73.
73 do pass. And with that, I would call on Senator Brennan.
Senator Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have before us here, Senators, Senate File 73, the Charter School Funding Amendments. Now, if you need to like stretch, please do so, and then follow me and ask questions if you can't follow, because it's a simple yet complicated bill, sort of. So for a little bit of background, when our charter school funding, statutes went into place, there was some compromises that we had to make with our friends down the hall to get this through. And so what we're doing with this bill is we're coming back and basically asking for a more equitable funding for the charter schools. So what this bill does, and you have a sheet, you should have a sheet on your desks too that helps explain, because if you read the language in the bill, it talks about percentages and calculations and attachment A and all kinds of things. So this paper that you have will kind of simplify that. So what we're doing is there are 2 areas of funding that charter schools are currently not getting, but they are being retained by the district. So if you'll remember, we fund schools at a district level. Our charter schools are public charter schools. So any student attending a charter school is calculated into the calculations for the district. Okay, so the charter school students, again, they get calculated into the district, and the district then gets money for the charter schools, and these portions here, the districts are currently retaining, and the charter schools do not get money, even though their money is being generated by their students. So there's 2 areas that's happening that this bill addresses. One of those areas is the central office staff administration. So these are things like the superintendents and assistant superintendents and those kinds of things, and then also clerical staff and secretaries. On that part, we're gonna calculate a percentage of the ADM, and that's what the charter schools are gonna get. The other one is a central office non-personnel expense, which pays for things like toilet paper, cleaning supplies, materials, those kinds of things for the students. In statute, that is just a number, which is about $451, I think, per student. I apologize, I don't have the exact number in front of me. And so what this bill does, again, is it just gives that portion that's being generated for the district by the charter school students back to the charter schools, so that the charter schools can get that money. There's also, for you, calculations here that are gonna give an idea of every charter school that we have and how much money that is going to, they would get back. So I am ready for any questions you might have.
Questions? Sensing that you're ready for the question, all those in favor of Senate File 73, please say aye. Opposed? Senate File 73 has passed Committee of the Whole. The next Senate file for your consideration is Senate File 20. The reading clerk will read in the bill.
Senate File 20, Oil and Gas Bonding, Options and Bonding Pools, an act relating to oil and gas, sponsored by the Minerals Committee. It was referred to Committee Number 9, which turned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Cooper, Jones, Nethercott, and Rothfuss. Senator Anderson, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with the recommendation that Senate File 20 do pass. And there is a standing committee amendment. Could I have it ready at this time, please?
Of course there is.
Senate File 20, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 3, line 11, after.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to explain the bill, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Senate File 20 is work that we did during the interim on the Minerals Committee. This is an important bill, probably one of the more important ones we've worked on in the last few years that relates to oil and gas bonding, particularly targeting small operators and allowing them to continue operation based on some concerns that they had with regard to federal rule changes on bonding, oil and gas bonding. So at the federal level, rules were recently passed that raised the minimum bonding for a well from $10,000 to $150,000. That's per well. At the same time, the statewide blanket bond was raised from $25,000 for a statewide blanket bond per operator to $500,000. So that's the type of thing that perhaps our large operators can manage and work through, but for our small operators, a lot of them don't even have that much revenue in a year. And that's the bonding requirement. So there was significant concern by our small operators that they wouldn't be able to continue operation once this went fully into effect, and it's intended to go fully into effect on June 30th, 2026. In fact, portions of it are already under effect. If you're doing new wells, you have to operate under the new rules, but it goes into full effect on June 30th, of 2026. The idea of this legislation is to create a bonding risk pool through the State Oil and Gas Conservation Commission in a way that allows operators to effectively share risk and post that federal bond without having to uniquely and individually post it. So it's a tremendous savings for them. It allows them to continue to operate, and it allows a substantial portion of our oil and gas production to continue, where our small operators actually produce a full third of the oil production in the state of Wyoming. So this is a very big deal, incredible potential risk to our revenue, our jobs, our industry, and we've got a good solution that we put together during the interim to resolve that. I'm going to walk through how the solution works and how we built a little bit of a risk pool. So we've actually got two different options, and you'll see as we go on page 2 that the Commission's going to promulgate rules to establish these bonding options. The first of those options requires that the program and the Commission allow for voluntary participation in this risk pooling scenario. We see that in Romanet 1. That's an important factor. Any operator that doesn't want to participate is free to not participate, but we expect many of them to participate because it's going to turn out to be a good deal. Romanet 2 indicates that anyone participating in the bonding pool shall be in good standing with the commission. On to page 3, Romanet 3 indicates that the commission shall contract with a person, so that includes corporations or other entities, to establish a bonding pool to serve as a financial assurance, and this is the important part, for the plugging of dry or abandoned wells for reclamation requirements, for the forfeiture of any applicable bond, and for any other requirements associated with the operator's applicable bonds. So this gets to the federal requirements of what need to be in place to ensure that these operators can continue operation in the state of Wyoming. And then details of the bonding pool are provided in the next 2 subparagraphs. That the A paragraph indicates that it be established with funds assessed under paragraph 5, we'll get to that, or available under paragraph 6 and otherwise unexpended. And this is actually the subject of the amendment. So at this time, I'm going to move Senate File 20, Standing Committee Amendment number 1, and ask for the body's favorable consideration. What we do here for further clarity, and you'll see it on line 11, where we indicate or other or available under paragraph 6 of this subsection, we insert comma, including any unexpended and unobligated funds available in the account established under Wyoming Statute 35-116B. So this gets to the seeding of the risk pool, right? For there to be a risk pool backing the potential liability, we have to have some funds. There are already funds available in the OGCC in this specific account that are unencumbered and available that have been paid through previous fees. So they're sitting there and they're sufficient for us to start this pool operating. So this amendment would allow those funds to be utilized to seed the pool, and then in the future, additional funds could be raised. Let's take action if there are no questions on that at this point in time for the simplicity. It's just clarifying that they can use the unavailable funds at this point in time, Mr. Chairman. So if there's no questions on the amendment, I'd call for the question on the amendment, and then we'll move on through the bill.
All those in favor of Senator?
On the amendment, yep.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, one more explanation, and the senator did mention it, but I want to mention it again. The money that's in those funds is not state funds. Those are monies that are paid in by the producers. And that's the $10,000 per well that they pay in. So that $45 million is not general funds. It's funds that the producers already paid in, and they want to use it for a pool. Thank you.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is on this, the money that's you're wanting to put into the pool. You said that this was voluntary. Do all the members that have already put into the pool have to agree that that money goes toward this type of thing, or what? Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
On the question, these are previously paid fees that are available in their conservation fund account that have been collected in recent years, and they have sufficient resources there to seed this risk pool. So there wouldn't need to be any agreement by the existing members, although based on those that present and lobby on behalf of those members, it's pretty clear that everyone thinks it's a good idea. So they don't have to be asked, but there certainly isn't any objection to it.
Are you ready for the question? Yeah. All in favor of Senator Anderson's motion to adopt Standing Committee number 1 to Senate File 20, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That amendment has passed. On to the bill.
Mr. Chairman, continuing, so that provides for the authority to add additional funds through any assessment in paragraph 5, which we'll get to, as well as seed those funds through the unobligated funds. The B paragraph indicates that they would be authorized also to accept any additional funds as otherwise authorized by law. The Romanet 4 paragraph below indicates that if the commission determines that contracting with a person, so that's what we had above, they're looking to a third party to work with to provide the assurance and to facilitate the bonding, and then we would have this reserve pool. That's option 1, use a third party. But Romanet 4 says if the commission determines that they can't find a third party to work with, then they are authorized to create the pool on their own. And it indicates that the commission shall establish that bonding pool subject to the following considerations. We see on page 4 that it's managed by the commission. It requires operators to be in compliance and maintain compliance, and that it too would be funded by contributions from operators consistent with the prior paragraphs. On to page 5. This is the Romanet 5, which indicates that a commission may impose an assessment on each participating operator on the fair cash value market value of oil and gas produced. So this is what's done right now for our orphan and abandoned well program. We have a conservation fund where currently 0.2 of a mil, I believe, is the current number that's being used. No, that's not quite right. It might be 0.5 of a mil. Either way, there's a mill levy available on every barrel of oil produced. That's taken aside into the conservation fund, and that has been used successfully to plug abandoned and orphaned wells over the years. In fact, 7,000 were done over the last decade. So that's a successful program. We know they've succeeded in doing 7,000 wells. We can take on the additional responsibility here. And you see that this fee that might be imposed starts off at 0 mils. This is on lines 9 through 11, that beginning July 1st, 2025 through July 30th, an assessment shall be 0 mils. And then beginning July 1st, 2030, it can be assessed thereafter at a different fee up to 0.5 of a mil. It starts off at 0 mils because, as indicated, there's adequate bonding backing in this seed pool. If there are any problems where there's a draw upon that, they would go to the conservation fund as a backstop. But this is an insurance process, and that counterparty is actually going to establish insurance payments on each of the wells as what you could imagine a whole life insurance type policy on a per well basis, where they're required to be paying in to insure that well, and then there's actually an asset associated with the well. When the well achieves end of life, there are assets there available to plug and abandon it, and then the risk of a failed well or any of the early orphaning or abandoning would be taken up by the risk of this third-party associate through the insurance program. So first layer is insurance. If there's an insurance problem and the insurance doesn't cover it through the policy, there's the risk pool. If the risk pool doesn't cover it, then we'll see that it goes to the conservation fund. So there's 3 levels of surety layered, and it leads to an incredible de-risking of these assets. All funds collected shall be deposited in a separate account as indicated. Bottom of page 5, Romanet 6 discusses the allowance of using unobligated funds. This is where that language came from. As a source, any unexpended and unobligated funds, if there is an insufficiency, they can draw upon. Romanet 7 on page 6 indicates that those funds shall only be expended on expenses associated with the plugging and abandonment, as we indicated. Bottom of page 6, Romanet 8, indicates that the Commission may enter into agreement with the United States or any federal agency to provide for the plugging of dry or abandoned wells. This is a key consideration. Typically what ends up happening if there's a default is that the bond defaults to the federal government. The intent here is to negotiate with BLM so that rather than defaulting the entirety of the bond, which would be expensive, $500,000 for a statewide blanket bond, the state would just take on, through the risk pool, the obligation to plug and abandon it, which could be only several $1,000s. It might be $10,000 for some of our shallow wells and only $5,000, but you might get to $25,000 for a deep well. So a substantial savings if we can negotiate that agreement. It's not necessary, but it certainly helps. On to page 7, Romanet 9 indicates that the Commission may provide for the transfer of these financial assurances through the sale of operation, but that no transfer shall be completed until a bonding review is done. Romanet 10 is kind of a long-term concept that as this program builds up and becomes more successful, if it becomes more successful, the Commission can do a surety analysis to determine whether it's appropriate for them to reduce their traditional bonding requirements. One thing I'm just going to pause and note, because I don't think I made it clear at the beginning. The impetus for this was for federal lands. That's what's causing it, but it applies to all operators on all lands. They would all be eligible for it. And it's an instrument that, again, de-risks their oil and gas operations while at the same time providing them cost savings, and therefore making sure that their capital is deployed in actual operations instead of deployed on the bonding side to the greatest degree possible. That's very relevant to this paragraph 10, where as we build this program up and it's de-risked, we can take away some of the existing bonding requirements and offset them using the risk pool. But those calculations have to be based on sound math, as you see. On to page 8. Indications that calculations need to assure that that would not increase the risk or impair the financial condition of the fund. Middle of page 8, Romanet 11, indicates a reporting requirement to JAC as well as the Minerals Committee that includes number of operators, amount of funds expended, and number of and type of bonds supported by the program. On to page 9, paragraph B, discusses that the commission shall establish a financial assurance to be available in the event that an operator's surety or other guarantee and the bonding pool established under this section is insufficient. This is the backstop to the backstop that I mentioned, which is going to be the conservation fund funding that we've traditionally used for plugging and abandonment. That program already exists and has been wildly successful. As I mentioned, it's plugged 7,000. Romanet 1, bottom of page 9, again goes to the source of those funds, which is the unexpended and unobligated funds in the conservation fund. On to page 10, Romanet 2, again talks about ensuring that the financial assurance, when combined with the operator surety bonds, are sufficient and satisfies all bonding requirements needed. It allows in Romanet 3 that they may contract with any third party to provide those financial assurances under the subsection, so we can outsource this, which is probably going to be appropriate for some of the financial assurances. Romanet 4, again, allowing for the state to contract with a company that is certified under the United States Department of Treasury Bureau of the Fiscal Service as an approved surety bond company. That's what's required to get federal approval for federal operations or oil and gas operations on federal land. You have to have a certification with that entity, so it would allow the state to contract with a third party that's already listed as an approved third party with the federal government. That then would allow us to backstop those bondings and create this group pooling system. On to page 11, again, another opportunity to enter into agreements with the United States to ensure financial assurance satisfies bonding. The Romanet 6 on page 11 discusses that it shall not expend any funds other than for the purpose listed. Romanet 7, this is a key, not later than 10 days after expending any funds available under the backstop to the backstop, it needs to report to the Joint Minerals Committee, because if we've actually reached the backstop to the backstop, then something went wrong and we need to talk about it. So that's one of those priority moments where we don't anticipate that. The projection is that that won't happen, and if it does happen, we need to know about it right away. Page 11, Romanet C, again, the commission may enter into agreements to facilitate with the federal government, and in executing those agreements, the operator's surety bond or other guarantee can come to the state, and if the operator's surety bond or other guarantee is insufficient, then we can go to the backstop, the conservation fund. D on page 12 indicates that this is a reiteration of the existing requirements of responsibility for the operator, so nothing new here, but it's just reiterating that the operator is still responsible for furnishing a surety bond or other guarantee in accordance with existing statute as required by the OGCC, and that they are obligated to complete any plugging, repairing, or reclamation of wells in accordance with this act and the rules of the commission, right? The primary responsibility and obligation is always the operator, regardless of what program is put in place. Page 13, and moving on, is conforming language put into statute that just references back to this program. Same thing on page 15, referencing back to the program in existing statutes. And then on page 16, requirements for promulgations of rules by the OGCC to implement these programs. Effective date is split on page 17, as you can see, so they can get started immediately with putting together the rules. Mr. Chairman, it's a long and relatively complicated bill, but we spent quite a lot of hours in the Minerals Committee. We had an excellent working group, including stakeholders from industry, the state, and others to get this just right. This is something that's essential to the community and certainly a first of its kind in the country. A lot of good work went into this, and I thank all the members that spent time on it, as well as stakeholders out in the public. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any questions.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to compliment Senator Rothfuss on an excellent rundown on that bill. I'd like to emphasize that this is caused by the federal government deciding they're going to increase our fees on our wells. And those wells are just on federal land, which is 50% of Wyoming. So this is how fast we can react to this. We expect that the federal government is going to react when we have a new administration and change those rules back. But we can't wait for them. Our operators need to know that they're backed up right now and that they can move ahead. So that's why it's critical that we get this done and we back them so they don't have to pay $150,000 for every well and $500,000 to be able to operate in this state. So this is a very important bill for us, and we would appreciate your kind consideration. Thank you.
Are you ready for the question? Oh. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question, and that is the pool attached to the asset or to the owner? So say someone is in this pool and they're contributing to the pool, and then they sell the company. Does that have to be in the contract that the company stays in the pool, or can they pull out if they sell? And maybe you covered that and I missed it. I was listening intently, but if you could answer that one question, I'd appreciate it.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm interested by this bill. I live in a part of the country, there's a lot of oil wells, and some of those oil wells are 50 years old. They are an enormous liability, not just to the company, but to the landowner and to the mineral owner as well. By the lessee, the value of the equipment is almost nil. It's not even scrap, it's scrap material. Costs you more to haul it off than it's worth a lot of the times. So, but I have two queries. The wildly successful 7,000 wells that the state has plugged on the Conservation Fund, those were plugged because operators walked away from their obligation. That's why we have this system, when people walk away. Now we're gonna go on the front end and give them an access that I don't want them to walk away from. Everybody thinks about the shiny new wells. People like me in my country, we live with the stripper wells, the wells that barely produce or don't produce. They have very little financial ability left in them, minus EOR or something else that is also very expensive. And we as landowners deal with that. So that's the first one. Let's just be clear. That 7,000 was because operators did not fulfill their obligations to plug and abandon those wells because of their own obligation, and the state had to step in. But they stepped in because they were orphan wells, because no one could actually cover them or pay the bill or et cetera, and they were on state and fee lands, not federal lands. Not federal lands. The federal government has an obligation for that, and it currently, no matter how many operators it goes through, the initial operator, the initial person that the lease was issued to, on my family's case, it's a company from 1952 on our ranch, 1952, and it's gone back that far because every company, from changing hands, et cetera, or just dissolving, not being available, no one was left, and so they had to go back to that original company or their successor and have those things abandoned. But let's be honest, that still is not an orphan well. So my question for the bringers of this bill is, this doesn't even talk about orphan wells, this talks about dry wells and abandoned wells. So I would like to know what the definition of a dry well is, And I'd like to know what the definition of an abandoned well is in the context of our overall statutes and in the context of this, because it seems like now we're going to a different place with how this is being used, because a dry well is not an orphan well. It's not, it has an obligated operator there. So I'd like to understand how that's actually being used and being considered in this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, addressing those questions, and I appreciate the discussion. To my good senator's question about transferring the asset, the way it's envisioned with the third party works very well for a transfer because it effectively is described as what you could contemplate as a whole life insurance policy associated with an individual well. So each well is evaluated for the risk of that well based obviously on many different parameters. You know, what's my depth, what's my probability of production, everything else, right? They're going to generate a profile on the well. And then there'll be some bonding requirements and some insurance payments associated with that. So I'm paying in monthly through cash flow instead of bonding where I'm taking out money from the system. I pay cash flow. At that point, the risk is with the insurance policy, and the counterparty that we've discussed with would pick up a lot of that initial risk through the insurance program aggregated. And it's easily portable at that point. It doesn't have to be, but like a whole life insurance policy, it has a value to it. That could be sold off. So you could liquidate that asset and then sell the well. We wouldn't want that necessarily because this asset basically is protecting that well from having to draw upon the pool later. The more time it operates, it builds up, and it gets to a point where associated with that well is a sufficient account of cash that will pay for the plugging and abandonment of that well. So it's an asset. That's a great program, and that's why it's good regardless of whether we need it or not. Even if the federal regulations went away tomorrow, this is a great thing because it cash flows the plugging and abandonment obligation over the operating life of the well and ensures that we don't have liability. Great system, very valuable across the board. When the state operates it, that sophistication, if the state operates it, which is not our choice A, that sophistication might be a bit of a stretch, but they still are authorized to figure out ways that they can do the transfer and ensure that as long as the operator that's buying it is in good standing, they would continue to operate and would not have to go to a full bond. If they're not eligible for the program because they're not in good standing, then they just have to pay the full bond. I think that's an important thing, right? You have to be an operator in good standing. You can't be a fly-by-night operator. You can't be one of the operators that is nearing bankruptcy that my good colleague to my right from the northern part of the state talked about because they don't have the financial confidence, and so full cost bonding, or not full cost bonding, but full bonding, traditional bonding, would be more appropriate. I hope that answers the question about the transfer. The intent is that it is a transferable asset if desired, but the commission has to approve it. On to the discussion about changing things. The 7,000 wells, I want to point out that the state stepped in. That is accurate. On those wells, the state stepped in because those 7,000 wells were subject to entities that were bankrupted. And there were quite a few different entities, right? What typically happened was one of the majors produced the best bits, and then smaller companies, the intermediates came in, took a little more, and then some smaller companies that didn't necessarily have the wherewithal and cash came in, ended up going bankruptcy while holding the asset, and then they were orphaned and abandoned wells. So under that circumstance, the state did step in, but I want to point out, Mr. Chairman, the state didn't pay for it. This is a really important thing. The state stepped in, but not $1 of taxpayer money was used in plugging those wells. The conservation fund that I mentioned earlier, which is already in place, was the source of the funding. So with every barrel of oil produced, it's effectively an insurance policy for the state, and that insurance policy managed to plug 7,000 orphaned wells. And I think that is a pretty incredible effort. This system does shift it, though, because it allows the operator, rather than focusing all of their payments on the bonding, which is effectively taking capital out of the system, setting it aside, and having somebody else take some money away, they have the opportunity to invest in that individual well, build up the asset that will pay for the plugging and abandonment. So if we had had this in place for all of the 7,000 wells and they had all operated sufficiently, full cost of plugging and abandonment would have been in place associated with each of those wells. So even when the entity went bankrupt, everything would have been there to pay for it. So to my good friend's concerns, it actually de-risks those concerns. And again, it's evaluated on an operator basis. If you have a shady operator, they're not going to be eligible for this program. They're going to have to step up and post their bond. But our good operators that have been operating for a long time, working hard for the people of Wyoming, they're going to benefit from this, Mr. Chairman. I think I addressed all the questions.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Anderson's motion that when Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 20, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. That Senate File 20 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 42. The reading clerk will read in the Senate file, if I give it to him.
Senate File 42, Resort Hotel Liquor Licenses, an act relating to alcoholic beverages, sponsored by Senator Guru. Was referred to Committee Number 7, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Boner, Dockstader, and Landon. No, Senator Steinmetz. Conflict, Senator Case. Senator Case, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Guru? Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 42, Resort Hotel Liquor Licenses. Senator Guru is going to give an explanation of the bill. Before he stands up, I'd like to enter a conflict on this bill. I do own a resort liquor license. I will be speaking about it, though. So to Senator Guru, who will present the bill.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you today Senate File 42, and first I want to apologize to the Corporations Committee who just heard this bill yesterday. You're going to hear the same little story again. I apologize for that. This bill came to me, as a lot of bills come to all of us, from a constituent who had an issue. And so this was last year. And so I had the bill written up and brought it down. And as I walked around and talked to folks about it, I came to hear what essentially was at first something for a constituent of mine. Actually, people started coming and say, hey, this sounds like it could work in my community. And actually, if you recall, for those of you that were here, it missed introduction by one vote. It pulled 20 votes on introduction, so one short. And so I bring it back today, and I wanted to talk to you about it as what I believe this truly is and what I've come to learn from talking to folks around the state. This is an economic development bill. Today, in our liquor laws, a resort liquor license requires that you have 100 rooms, that you have a convention area, that you have a restaurant. And if you do that and do that investment, it allows you to receive a liquor license. And a liquor license that's a little bit different than a retail license. You can sell retail product. So you can buy a bottle of wine there, but you can only consume it on the property, on premises. So it's not a package sale like what you would see as a regular retail liquor license, which, by the way, I have a retail liquor license, but I'm not declaring a conflict because this has nothing to do with my business or any part thereof. So let's go through the bill real quick. So basically what this bill does is what I just said, except with the change that it lowers the number of rooms from 100 to 35. In addition, it requires a $10 million investment. This is, oh, and I'm sorry, I should be referencing this. The $10 million investment is on page 2, line 13. And then the restaurant piece is on page 2, line 16. And the 35 rooms is on page 2, line 20. And then over on page 3, it provides that the restaurant be open for 12 hours a day. Also on page 3, if you skip down to line 5, it says a meeting provides facilities for business meetings that can accommodate not less than 50 participants. And the rest of the bill goes on and talks about what the license mean, what the permit costs are. As you know, the fees are set by the local jurisdiction, but it just gives a range of amounts. And you see that on page, on page 4 and page 5. And then on page 5, also you see there on line 9, the sale of beverages for off-premise consumption is prohibited. Oh, hey, and here at the bottom of 5, there's the annual fees. And then pretty much on from there, just talking about restrictions and what you can and can't do. So the bottom line on this bill, folks, is that right now we are across the state in our second largest industry, tourism, working to promote areas that maybe heretofore had not received a lot of attention, but now, because the lodging tax boards are now in every county in the state, and monies through the lodging tax are flowing into those communities, they're promoting their communities and promoting tourist activities. What this bill does with a $10 million investment, for me, back in the day when we thought of this, we thought of big resorts and big hotels and big dollars. But today, the market's changed a bit. And so you see these smaller boutique hotels, smaller units that have nicer amenities. And in some of our smaller communities, a 100-unit motel or a resort really isn't feasible. But something at this size is. And as any hotelier will tell you, and those of you that are in that business, the restaurant part is something they don't really make money on or have expense, but it's something, an amenity that you need to have. So having a liquor license along with it I see it as an adjunct to, not like a retail license where you're selling bottles of liquor that people are taking out and taking them out off the property. This is for consumption inside. Think mini bar in an upscale hotel. Or just being able to order a dinner and a bottle of wine to be sent to your room and have it unopened, where now if you only way you can walk out with a bottle out of it with a restaurant license is to have it open. So that's really the essence of the bill. I think it has statewide applications. I want to kind of make sure that we see the scope of this whole thing. Right now in the state of Wyoming, there are 42 resort liquor licenses, 42 properties that are in the old style at 100 rooms. And ask at the committee, I said I would see maybe at least in the next 5-10 years that you might get 10 facilities like this around the state, if that. But I do believe as our tourism economy builds, this could pick up, and this could be a very good way for smaller communities to be able to take advantage of having an upscale property. And like I say, $10 million investment is significant. And one of the things that we talked about is, just to give you an idea, in the southwest part of the state, we're talking a lot about tourism. They're talking a lot about ATV trails, snowmobile trails and such. I think this would be a perfect opportunity for that kind of recreational activity, to be able to have a nicer, small, resort on the trail system so people could ride a ways and then stop and have a wedding or a small event and then move on. So just think in that kind of terms. I know that you've gotten some communications from folks, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have on this bill. And I urge your favorable consideration. Glad to stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it always worries me when I see constituent bills from the most expensive place in the state of Wyoming to live. And so the question I have is really gets to this issue of $10 million market value. Certainly you can, so the first question is how do we determine, because it doesn't say market value, assessed value, it just says value. So is that the original construction value? Is that the assessed value? Is that the market value? Who determines that? And the reason I ask that question, it will be vastly different from somebody in the northeast part of the state than somebody in the western part of the state with large mountains in it, is to determine that valuation as to whether they meet that test. And I'm just curious also is why 35? I mean, why does it have to be open for 12 hours? You know, over the years in this body, I've learned that when we start writing very prescriptive things, sometimes they have an unintended consequences of fencing out a lot of other potential business owners. And so if we can just go through that, but the value thing really is my primary concern, but just how did you land on these other numbers as far as that restaurant or service has to be 12 hours? You know, why not 8 hours? But just if we could have some more discussion on those criteria, it would be helpful for me, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't speak towards the exact, value of what it takes to construct your average hotel anymore, but I just want to say I've heard some positive feedback from my neck of the woods as well, where we're encountering the similar issue for perhaps different economic reasons. But nevertheless, you have, in case of say, large amount of energy activity, you have a lot of people flowing into places like Commerce County where it's not necessarily reflected in the census. And so I can't answer the good senator from Baggs' question directly. I can't say that we're also interested in the eastern part of the state as well. And so I think perhaps that would indicate that that $10 million figure would be somewhat relevant in areas outside of the most expensive place in the state to live. So I'm sure that those are good questions, and I haven't made the same ones. Is that the right figure? I don't know. I'm sure I'll hear feedback from my constituents, but my initial indication is that it is. I just want to express my support for the bill. This is relevant to more than just the northwest part of the state.
Senator Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a small question, a minor question. On page 7, there's the new language that allows for anyone holding the resort hotel license to sell a single bottle of liquor or wine to anyone 21 years of older. I'm just curious how that is enforced and how that's monitored. What kind of burden does the holder of the permit or the license have to keep a record? How would they establish that they, if it were challenged, for example, how would they establish that they only sold one bottle? Thank you.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not into drinking and liquor and all that good stuff, but there was a question that someone wrote in, and I just thought it'd be nice to get an answer. They said, as stated in this bill, resort hotel liquor licenses are dramatically changed from the original intent of the resort liquor license, essentially creating hotel and motel liquor licenses, not resorts. Can you answer that question? Thank you.
Senator Crum.
Mr. Chairman, I'm in favor of the idea. I think it's a great economic development plan. My only question is why 35, and then somewhat, my good senator from over there on the Little Snake River, why 35? Why not 12? What happens in not being a liquor license expert, but we've got a 6 or a dozen room hunting lodge or dude ranch that sells liquor and does those type of things. Where do they fit into this scheme? Why is it 35? What happens to those smaller ones? And should it read just up to 100 rooms? Just a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question would be, how will this affect the businesses in the area? If all of these smaller hotels and stuff are doing this, how is it going to affect the other restaurants and the other, I don't know, storefronts, things like that, if nobody really wants to go out and shop and they just want to get back to their room and go to bed and have a bite to eat, you know? And so I would just be curious to know if you think that there would be a financial impact for other businesses in that community. So, thank you.
Senator Guru, you want to take us home?
Yeah, I'll give it a try. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, to the senator, good senator from Baggs, try to remember all the questions, but basically, about the 10 million. And I know probably if anyone other than myself would have brought this bill, I don't think this would have been a question, but it's a fair question nonetheless. This was one of the changes I went through. Actually, the fellow who came to me and asked, he's put in over $75 million into his deal. So this bill really doesn't, except for he had part of the say on the number, but the number 10 million came from the rest of the state. What would be a number that would be considered, and this goes a little bit to answer Senator Pearson's question, but someone who's putting in a $10 million, I mean, to a lot of you isn't much, but to me, that's a lot of money. As far as how much you invest in a business, whether say you're buying an older, this is a big thing in the industry now. You're buying an old motel, we talked about it in committee, an older place that has maybe 35 rooms, and you're fixing it up in sort of a retro deal, and you're bringing it up in quality and stature from just really an old roadside motel. And so that's where the restaurant part comes in, and this is back a little bit to Senator Pearson's question as well. I think that, and I'm sorry, from Sweetwater County, I apologize. But trying to have a restaurant at 12 hours, this is about not competing as much with the bar or giving enough amenities to deserve to have the liquor license. That what this isn't trying to do isn't trying to make it so, and then we talked about this in testimony, not to have a 35-unit motel, put a pizza oven next to the front desk and be able to get a liquor license. So to have a restaurant that's open 12 hours a day, that has room service, and those types of rules cost the operator money, but provide a resort product, which is the type of product that will help, I think, up our game in tourism. But the liquor license then is an incentive for that owner to make that investment, to make what is going to be a loser for them a little bit by serving food 12 hours a day, but can maybe make it up in selling liquor by the drink or having a bottle of wine sent to your room when you get there. So that's where it kind of all comes into concert. And as far as the question about 100 rooms and 35 and where the rooms come, it's kind of like this. I'm not supposed to use props, but 25 years ago, you wouldn't see one of those electronic devices on everyone's desk that's there right now. The market to things have changed. And so in our business, in the resort business, in the hospitality business, the market has changed. What people want has changed. And so what this bill tries to do is to add another tool to the toolbox of being able to build things to promote tourism in certain areas. So that's the wherewithal. Like I say, the money and the 35 rooms, up to 35 rooms, there's a lot of, shall I say, reluctance by the liquor industry. They worry about competition. Now, most of us in our business open up and compete in the marketplace, and we openly compete. And I know some have talked on this floor. We've had bills in the past about maybe, privatizing the liquor division and getting out of the liquor business altogether. Where was government involved? Well, we are. And so what we're trying to do here is, just like I say, create another niche product. There is some concern that if we just blow off any number, that can open something up that may be an unintended consequence that we're not looking for. Someone who's opening it up just to drive liquor sales by throwing up a couple of motel rooms that may be dubious of whatever, but more for the liquor and not, trying to try to game out another liquor license. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to provide a customer experience. That, yes, in our community, our community has matured a bit in its offerings, but a lot of other communities haven't. And I don't believe that it would be a much bigger leap for someone to build 100 units coming out of the chute. They may want to get there eventually, but they also want to have a full experience. So that's why we settled on the number 35. And like I say, this I haven't said, but I will say now, this bill is supported by our cities and towns organization, also supported by people that sell dirt. There's a big statewide organization that sells property. Well, they've endorsed this bill as well, because they both see it the way I see it and the way I hope you see it when you vote yes on this bill, as an economic business builder and something for the future of our state. Like I say, the tool in the toolbox. I think, I'm trying to see, did that get to all the, your question, I'm sorry, Senator, ask one more, if I could have that last question again from Senator, right here in the Capitol.
Senator Hutchings.
Because I don't think I got an answer, I'm going to add another one. Just an email from someone from your neck of the woods stated, he said, as stated in this bill, resort hotel liquor licenses are dramatically changed from the original intent of resort liquor licenses, essentially creating hotel and motel liquor licenses, not resorts. Then the second question is, where did the words boutique resort come from? Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm still trying to get an answer to my question on the valuation. And I understand the explanation if it costs me to build X. But I think even my colleague said, well, what if I buy a facility and I spend $8 million renovating it? That's not $10 million. So is the value, the determination of the value on how much it costs to build or renovate, or is it based on assessed valuation by the county or market value? Because you could have a number of these around the state that may meet that threshold, but I'm trying to figure out, how do you determine and what method do you determine the value of those facilities? Something that's retrofitted, that's 40 years old, that only cost a few $1 million may be a market value of over 10 million. So I just need to understand, how is the determination going to be made that you met, and who makes that determination? That's the second part. So 2 questions.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned, I own a resort liquor license, so I have a conflict on this bill. I just want to give a little background about how it works. First off, the valuation, it could be an appraised value. It says in the law, have an actual valuation of, or the applicant shall commit to expend or have actually expend on a resort hotel not less than the 10 million. So you can come in with, I spent 10 million on this place. Yeah, I know it's a dump, but I spent 10 million on it, I really did. Or you can come in with a valuation that says this hotel prices for, 20 million. And that's what the licensing authority would go after. I think what everybody needs to understand is this is a different way of allocating licenses. And I think that's been missed so far. This one doesn't come under any population-based restrictions that a community might have. That's important in some communities, not important in other communities. So this is in essence an extra liquor license every time these qualifications are met. And the qualifications under this bill would be 35 rooms. Now, I went about this the hard way. It took me, and so I'm a little bit grumpy, okay? It took me 10 years to build a 100-room hotel, build a restaurant, and build conference facilities that would seat 100 people. And one of the reasons I chose all those numbers was because we had a liquor law that allowed me to bypass the population formula that applies to full retail licenses and bar and grill licenses and achieve a liquor license. Fair enough, that was my deal, that was back then. So still in Wyoming law, if you have a retail liquor license, full retail, which allows for the package, or you have a bar and grill license, they are controlled by population numbers tied to the population of the community or the county, depending on who the issuance authority is. But no matter, you could have it filled up for retail and bar and grill, but then this doesn't follow that formula. This is a new standard. 35 rooms, restaurant, has to be open a certain amount of time. That's the rules. So it bypasses the population control. Now, the organization that represents municipalities like this. They look at liquor licenses as economic development. We have, and they've successfully lobbied the legislature, and we've supported them in expanding the number of liquor licenses available under especially the bar and grill license, which is keeps going up by population, and eventually will not have a population limitation at all. That's being phased in. There is another type of liquor license, just to confuse people more, is a restaurant liquor license, okay? Those numbers are unlimited. Any restaurant can apply and achieve a restaurant liquor license. But there are differences in all these licenses, which is an important difference. Full retail liquor license, you can have package service, and you qualify for catering permits. Bar and grill license, there's no package service, but you can have a bar. That's the model that all these restaurants use, these chain restaurants. That's it. A pure restaurant license, they don't have a bar, but they can serve liquor. And they go bring it to your deal. Anybody can get a restaurant license, as long as you have a restaurant. Bar and grill is limited by population, but expanding, and retail is also limited by population. Bar and grill doesn't have a catering permit. A restaurant doesn't have a catering permit. Then we come to the resort license. The special thing about the resort license is it's not limited to a dispensing room. And I should point out, we've changed the law on the bar and grill license and the restaurant licenses too, where they're just the building. They're not limited to a dispensing room either. But the nice thing, if you have a resort, and in my place I have a swimming pool, I've got different buildings, I can set up a bar in all those places and serve to a conference guest. It's a great license for a big facility like mine. And so that's an important thing to have. It has always been kind of vague, but it's been that we could sell liquor for someone to take to their rooms, but that they can't, you're not selling packaged liquor. So this puts a deal that it would be basically one bottle going back to the room, probably a bottle of wine. So I hope I've done a fair description of the different types of licenses. I'm a conflict on this bill. It's a big change, and I think some of my companions that have resort licenses and 100 hotel rooms and conference facilities are kind of sore about it, to be honest, because this is a big change. Why do we spend all that money when it could have been 35? But I just am trying to provide you with a full-scale talk on this. Thank you very much.
Senator Kolb.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just have a general question here. I mean, after I learned a lot more about these liquor licenses than I ever knew before, tell me how this will not devalue a liquor license of somebody selling liquor near one of these areas that are currently selling liquor to these folks that may be coming out of these motels in this situation. Does this devalue their license? I mean, that's really my big question. Is it a negative to an investment that a business has already made, could be quite a bit of money, quite substantial, And I am concerned because we have a phase-in period with other kinds of licenses to kind of step slowly into another way of issuing licenses that are differently than we issued in the past that cost sometimes $500,000. So I'd like to hear more about how this would affect another holder of a liquor license in this vicinity of, say, this choice happening if they meet this criteria. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Garou.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't, to the good senator from the capital city's question, I don't think it's a radical change at all. And I think that my good colleague, while a little sore, as he said, really explained it pretty well and explained the different types of licenses. Like I say, like so many things in our society during its business, during this business life, where we go from one kind of car to now different kinds of cars, and now there's electric cars, and this is the same thing. It's an industry that evolves. And today this industry is evolving this way. This is the way, if you think about it when you travel. Do you travel and say, well, I'm on the road and I'm just staying one night, so I'll grab a motel that's got beds and a parking area, and I'm just going to go to bed and get up and drive the next day. But if you're in a community for a couple of days, maybe you want to have one with a restaurant, or you want to have one with availability to have a glass of alcohol. People now look for that more in their travels, and that is a growing part of the industry. Now to the question about devaluing a license, and I am tickled that you asked, because it just so happens that I have a little history in this field. In 1980, I opened a restaurant in my hometown, and in 1986, we had a fire, and I was closed for a year. In those days, while they were rebuilding my business, during those days, there were nothing but retail licenses. They were just coming on with resort licenses, but retail there was no restaurant license. There was no bar and grill license. So restaurants, especially in a tourist town like mine, had restaurants all over the place, but most of them couldn't serve alcohol at all because it was based on population. And we had a higher number of restaurants than we had for a summer swell of tourists, but not enough with our real population. So when I was closed, the restaurant owners of my town hired me to come here to Cheyenne and try to get a restaurant liquor license. I spent the entire session here. I worked with the predecessor of the fellow upstairs who's watching us right now at the liquor dealers group, his predecessor, and I heard the exact same questions and the exact same comments. This will devalue the licenses that everyone else has. This is different. This is gonna be not so good. And we sat and we talked and we worked together, just like in this bill with these requirements about restaurant serving for 12 hours. We had in that bill, we had no open dispensing area. It had to be enclosed from the public. Their hours had to be set. They couldn't advertise liquor in the paper. They couldn't display bottles of liquor anywhere in the establishment, because those are the things that the liquor owners at the time wanted to make sure the restaurant owners couldn't do, so they wouldn't be competing. That was in 1986. Today, all the rules and regulations around that have pretty much been dropped, changed, obfuscated, or just worked around. And you know what's happened? The value of liquor licenses have gone up. The rest of the hospitality business has grown, and people are having a better experience when they come and travel to our state. This is exactly what I anticipate with this bill, and exactly why I'm bringing it to you and asking you for your support. I do not believe the boogeyman things that you hear about that, although I appreciate it. I mean, I wish if anybody wants to bring a bill that says we're going to cap the number of restaurants in this state, count me in, because I'd love to not have any more competition. But I don't think that's the way it works. I was always told in the free market that was a little bit different. So I urge your support on this bill. This bill is a good bill, and I think that it's a bill that over the years you'll find it may be a very wise decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Case's motion that when committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 42, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Senate File 42 has passed committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 95. Senator Crago.
Privilege of the floor, Mr. Chairman.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good senators, today in the gallery, we are joined by our county commissioners from across the state. These dedicated public servants ensure that all of our Wyoming citizens receive important services back home, and they usually do it on a pretty tight budget. Please help me welcome them to the Wyoming Senate and thank them for all they do for the state of Wyoming.
Senator Kolb.
Yeah, privilege of the floor, Mr. Chairman.
Granted.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome our county assessor, lost my head for a second there, David Devis from Sweetwater County, up here in the gallery. Welcome to the Senate.
Reading clerk will please read in the bill. I don't have 95. Hmm? Oh.
Senate File 95, Special Purpose Depository Institution Amendments, Act relating to banks, banking, and finance, sponsored by Senator Rothfuss, was referred to Committee Number 9, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Cooper, Jones, Nethercott, and Rothfuss. Senator Anderson, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a recommendation that Senate File 95 do pass. And to explain this good little bill, we have Senator Rothfuss again.
Quicker.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It'll be quicker. Mr. Chairman, Senate File 95, Special Purpose Depository Institution Amendments was work from the Joint Blockchain Committee during the interim. Since it relates to Title 13, it had to come as an individually sponsored bill, and this is the product of that. These are updates and revisions to our Special Purpose Depository Institution law. Recall that in 2019, we passed legislation creating a new type of bank charter called a Special Purpose Depository Institution that allows the custody of digital assets like cryptocurrencies along with the custody of fiat currency. So if there's any more questions about that, I'm happy to answer them, but I'll leave the background to further discussion later. Going through the legislation, this bill does three things. The first thing it does is it provides a mechanism for a speedy bank to convert through the Division of Banking and Banking Commission process into a regulated trust. They can also custody digital assets, and there was some interest in having the flexibility in statute, so we spent some time working on how to do that. That is effectively what we see on the first few pages, where page 1, it talks about this is a new process allowed. You submit an application and proof of the interest. On page 3, you demonstrate how you're going to manage those assets and liabilities in the conversion. On page 3 onto page 4, you request through the Division of Banking and the board for consideration. And then the C paragraph indicates once you've completed all of the required steps, you can have that transformation take place. The second thing this bill does, which begins on page 5 at the bottom, is make it clearer how retail bank engagement would work for a Speedy Bank. So this is, instead of dealing from bank to business, this is now bank to customer in a little more traditional engagement. And there were some requests on changes, which include a couple of repealers, but mostly some changes on limits and requirements. So we see on page 6, the first request, as we're getting to a retail space, is lowering the minimum deposit from $5,000 down to $1,000. This is significant because with Speedy Banks, they can't lend. They're restricted from lending. So that means they can't have overdraft protection either. We're all used to that. If we dip a little below and we go below 0, it's okay. They'll cover you for a little bit, ding you with a $5 penalty, and everything's all right because they're allowed to lend. So that's a moment of lending. A Speedy Bank can't do that. So as a result, there's concerns that if we eliminate the $5,000 minimum balance completely down to 0, which was an initial request, the Speedy Banks would be getting dinged because there's no overdraft protection and the accounts would be in violation. So we lowered the $5,000 to $1,000, and then we provided some flexibility like banks have, which indicates that you've got a 5-day period of time to provide a remedy as the customer and the bank relationship takes place to ensure that you don't have a bunch of violations being filed against this institution. So it provides some flexibility at the request of some of the institutions that we have operating in the state of Wyoming, where we've got 4 operating Speedy Banks. On to page 7, this is some language changes that don't do anything effectively. The addition of the not less than 20% of the legally authorized capital. It's just based on the accounting calculation. This is consistent with our traditional state chartered banks, and so the language request is a request by Division of Banking to conform it with our other statutes. On page 7, we've got a series of repealers that get back to the allowance for retail banking, where it makes it clear that these banks can operate now with an individual customer and natural person, as opposed to having to have a specific requirement of operating in engagement with the business. And then the Title 34 repeal gets to a final point that we wanted changing. When we set up the Speedy Bank, we added a 0.2 of a mil assessment on the valuation, which provides a banking supervisory fee for the Division of Banking. They do not need that, and it turns out to be excessive. The supervisory fees that are already in place for other aspects of the bank are sufficient. So by repealing this, it becomes equal to what our traditional financial institutions and banking institutions have. They have the same supervisory fee requirements. That's what the bill does. The rest is rulemaking authority. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know I went over that fast, but I know we've also been talking about bills for a long time. So I'll go into as much depth as you want, but I suspect that's all you'd like. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Anderson's motion that when Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 95, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Senate File 95 is passed Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 60. Will the reading clerk please read in the file?
Senate File 60, Sales Tax Distribution Rates, an act relating to sales and use tax, sponsored by Senator French. Was referred to Committee Number 3, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, French, Ide, McEwen, and Pappas. Senator McEwen, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator French?
My pleasure is you pass it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What this bill does right now. That's where he, the chairman does that, not me. Doesn't the chairman do that?
You're the chairman right now.
All right. As acting chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 60 do pass. And for an explanation of it, me. All right, what this does is, right now, you pay 4% sales tax, state sales tax. And the ratio is 69% goes to the state general fund. 31% goes back to the local communities. Minus 1% for administrative reasons. So 30% goes back. What this bill does is changes that formula from 69% going to the state's general fund to 65%. And what goes back to the local communities from 31% to 35%. You were given 3 pages earlier that I'd like to talk to you about a little bit. The first page and the second page are the same thing. The first page, what it does, how it's different than the second page, is it has percentages. So if you follow across top left, sales tax distribution, starting with fiscal year 2016 down through 2024, you'll see we've gone from 381,842,524 in 2016 to 609,419,064 in 2024. Now the money going back to the local share, and that includes, when they say local share, that includes any optional 1 cent, 2 cent that your county may have voted in. So if you'll look on the total, go over a couple columns to the total, you'll see that 2016, the total general fund and local share was $745,671,010. And 2024, the general fund and local share combined was $1,199,501,100. Then the next column will show the general fund difference year over year, and then general fund percentage. So you'll see by the chart in 2021, from one year to the next, a drop of 16,715,080. That was COVID, when it made its presence made in the state. So you'll see after that, we started coming out of it, bump up 54,770, 197. In 23, it bumped up from that year an additional 72,393,254. 2024, it bumped up an additional above that figure, 35,664,892. And you'll see the percentages accordingly. Now, if you'll go to the back page, since those first two are same, one has more information than the other. The Craig report for fiscal 25, their January 24 forecast was 661,800,000. In October of 24, they adjusted that to 651.4. So as you can see, it goes up from 609,419,036 to 651.4. Now, if you take out money going back with the rate difference. That's additional money of about $42 million additional. If you'll see at the back of the bill, sorry, I'm bouncing around here, folks. At the back of the bill, the fiscal note, the last sentence in this fiscal note says, this bill is effective July 1st, 2025, impacting the distribution of the 4-cent sales tax and use tax beginning in fiscal year 2026. So it doesn't take into effect 2026, this $38,600,000 difference. So that full $38,600,000 won't totally be computed till the end of 2026, the end of next year. So essentially what this bill does is next year, it sends back $38,600,000 to the local communities. There's no money taken out of the general fund. There's no money taken out of the LISRA account. There's no money taken out of any of those. There's just less going into the general fund. There's still money, additional money going into the general fund. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Are you ready for the question? Sorry about that, Senator Hicks. I didn't see you through the monitor.
I
Senator
try to
Hicks.
hide. Mr. Chairman, I do appreciate the intent for this, but, you know, this body and this legislature has been very good, I think, to our cities, towns, and counties over the years. You know, every time we pass some form of property tax relief, we reduce their money. So in one aspect, you could say, well, this is replacing part of that. But every time we reduce theirs, it puts more obligation on the state. That general fund backstops the school foundation program. I think we all know where we're headed with the school foundation program. And so as we continue to take money away from the state at the same time we increase our obligations doesn't make any sense. But more importantly, what I wanted to share with you is, and I think you saw from the handout, that just through sales tax, and then the counties and towns have the option to do additional taxes. So $590 million for 2024. Well, let me tell you what else the state does for cities, towns, and counties. So out of the mineral severance taxes, and these are just mineral severance taxes, these are 2024 numbers. We diverted $14 million to cities and towns. Counties got $6 million of mineral severance. Counties got another $4.5 million of mineral severance taxes specifically for county roads. Cities, towns, and counties under the CAPCON with another $3.6 million distribution of federal minerals to cities, towns, and counties. We have the Water Development Program that gets about $23 million a year, roughly on an average annual basis. About half of that goes back to cities and towns. Through 100% grants on a lot of that because they do all the studies at 100%. Any infrastructure is a 50-50 cost share. And then we get the federal mineral royalties. And so these are the other monies that we send back to cities and towns and counties. So out of federal mineral royalties, cities, towns get $8.5 million last year. Cities, towns, and counties, again on that CAPCON account, got $7.4 million. There's another $4.4 million out of the federal mineral royalties that are distributed back to the counties for county roads. Lottery proceeds distributed back to those entities, those counties and towns that have those activities, $5.4 million. Skill-based games, $2.6 million went back to cities, towns, and counties. Parimutuel waging, $18.8 million went back. This is just last year's numbers, on top of the sales tax. Lodging taxes, I think that's built into that number my colleague gave me. Local government distributions, I believe last year in the budget, and as long as I've been here, we've funded local government distributions. That was $150 million on an annual basis. That was $75 million back to cities, towns, and counties. Mr. Chairman, I'm just cognizant of the fact that as we continue to assume more obligations to fund government, and that includes our common school and with property taxes, I'm not so sure, Mr. Chairman, that we're going to have enough money for the general fund if we keep diverting funds away from both to be able to meet our obligations. And we have been generous with those cities, towns, and counties, you know, from gambling to mineral severance taxes to local government distributions out of the general fund. So those are the numbers. They're right there in your fiscal data book. You can look them up. But we send a lot of money back to cities, towns, and counties. So regretfully, on and against the bill.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up or continue on, the good senator from Baggs, he talked about the obligations of the state. And, you know, I think this is a good way to look for reasons to make lesser obligations for the state, to cut spending, you know, decentralize these sales taxes coming into the state and spread them out a little more decentralized to the cities, towns, and counties. He makes a good point, you know, with the property taxes maybe taking a hit there. This is, in my opinion, a really good way to try to help the counties, cities a little more whole as a result of that. And we just really need to work on less obligation of state spending here. That should be our focus. So I think this is a really good bill on and for this bill.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, on and against this bill, I think it's a very commendable attempt to fund the cities, towns, and counties, but I think we have better ways of doing that, and that is by backfilling on property tax exemptions that we put forth. And if we backfill on property taxes, we can keep our cities, towns, and counties whole, use 38 million or 40 million a year to do that instead of just turning it over to them. And we get the bang for the buck with the property tax exemptions also. So on and against this methodology. Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On for the bill, but I do have concerns and share the concerns that we've heard. You know, we need to be thoughtful about the concepts of backfilling and thoughtful about our revenue streams. This obviously is a reduction in revenue to the general fund effectively, and, you know, fairly significant. But it's an increase directly to, for the most part, cities, to a lesser degree, our counties. But what we've talked a lot about is we're effectively giving tax cuts that lead to a reduction of revenue to the counties, as well as the school foundation program when we're looking at property tax. And we talk about backfill. We might backfill, it's possible, but when we look at one of the more significant circumstances that the legislature passed over the years, right, it was the elimination of sales tax on groceries, right? And a lot of us support that policy. That was a good policy. But it was a policy that came with an assurance by this body that we would backfill. Well, Mr. Chairman, we know that we can't bind future legislatures to decisions. So I'm sure that that group of legislators, when they showed up, believed that they would backfill. A backfill simply means a transfer of some other funds, effectively an appropriation, to the counties or to the cities. This mechanism is a funding stream that exists right now, right? We have 69% going to the general fund right now. This shifts it to 65%. You offset the 4%, you give it to the cities. as opposed to the backfill concept, which is easy to come back and just, oh, well, we're not appropriating it this year, we're sorry, it's a hard time for us, we cut your funding a few years ago, that's tough. This is one of those decisions that actually isn't a backfill concept, it's a fill concept. It's providing a dedicated revenue stream to our cities, towns, and counties in a way that's appropriate. And I'm supporting this effectively in isolation. I think this is good policy. In fact, I'd probably shift the numbers further. I think it's good policy for us to leave more of our sales and use tax with our cities, towns, and counties, and that's what this bill effectively does. But I'm absolutely sensitive to the idea that as we're reducing our revenue, this is one of the pieces we have to look at. So while this is good policy, we have to take it in consideration of everything else we're doing as we're decreasing our general fund, our school foundation program, what our counties have. So I'm cautiously supporting this, but I am supportive because I do think this is good public policy, Mr. Chairman. We just need to recognize where it goes, where things come from, and how we're going to balance that all in the end.
Senator Kolb.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. These are getting to be real difficult times. We're talking about cuts. I maybe categorize it as death by 1,000 cuts. And slowly but surely, we're bleeding. We have local distribution. Haven't talked about that. This comes nowhere close to that. I think what bothers me most about these numerous bills that are sent in front of us with good intention is that we don't have a holistic policy. We've got a piecemeal policy. We're trying to fix a problem with a bunch of Band-Aids. It concerns me that we have no vision of what we're doing in totality. So we take a little here, we put a little there. I don't know what that means in the big picture. Maybe that could be explained on what the local distribution looks like, or is this going to just be an add-on to that? I just don't know. But I don't like making decisions without knowing where we're going. And I see this as just a wholehearted attempt to do the right thing for the counties, to try to backfill some of the things that we're taking away. But without knowing the whole picture, I can't, in good faith, support this. And that's my concern with this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm a co-sponsor on here anyway, but I think it's a good idea. Out of the 8 years that are here, that he has the numbers, 3 of them, we were met with the increase would cover this. 3 of them actually were over what we're talking about, the 39 million, 38 million. And I think there was 2 that didn't, I think. Maybe I'm not adding right. I'm not, 3. But anyway, I think it's a good idea, and let's get it so our cities do know what they're gonna get, and it isn't coming from a block grant or such that we tend to manipulate when we desire to do that, but I'm on the bill and for it.
Senator Crum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to vote in favor of this bill. I think it's a good idea to get back, but I got to tell you, I'm getting really close to voting no across the board on anything that has to do with one way or the other, where good idea, bad idea. As the good senator over here said, death by 1,000 cuts. We don't have a holistic approach on our tax situation, and it's not going to work out well in the long run if we don't figure this out and get a look at this thing holistically instead of just little pieces at a time with no holistic approach. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hear people say, well, this is going to affect the state this way or that way. These counties are an arm of the state. they are the state. And your constituents, they go to the store, whatever, they pay that 4% tax. And it's almost offensive that they only get 30% back. People I run this by, they said, it should be 50-50, what's the deal? I said, well, it is what it is. I'm just trying to change it a little teeny bit. We down here, we do all these bills and everything else, and then the counties and cities have to implement what we say. So I encourage everybody, this is 38 million, 2 years from now. 2 years from now. If we can't do this, I don't know what we can do. So I would encourage everybody to vote for this.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator French's motion when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 60, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Senate File 60 is passed committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 46. Will the reading clerk please read in the bill?
Senate File 46, Water and Sewer Districts Bid Requirements, an act relating to water and sewer districts, sponsored by Senator Landon. Was referred to Committee Number 7, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Boner, Dockstader, Landon, and Steinmetz. No, Senator Case. Senator Case, Chairman.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I have a privilege of the floor just quickly? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, members, if you will welcome current county commissioner, former state representative Scott Clem, who's up in the gallery, a colleague from Campbell County, actually, I believe one of my constituents. Please welcome him to the Senate. Thank you.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Case?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, that it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 46, Water and Sewer Districts Bid Requirements. For great explanation of the bill, I know it's going to be good, and stay by my fine colleague from Natrona County.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that nice introduction. Senators, I bring you Senate File 46. This was a bill that came to us late in the interim to the Corporations Committee, the request of a constituent group that is represented in the title of the bill. And they requested that we take a look at this. It was too late to come with any sort of a committee bill. And so I bring you this bill for your consideration. A couple of years ago, you might remember that we increased the bid limits for our municipalities from 30,000 to 75,000. And that's what this bill seeks to do for our water and irrigation districts, water and sewer districts. I will say, not that I'm going to talk about another bill because we don't do that in here, but you just might hear about irrigation districts as well on this front. But this one is for our water and sewer districts. This, you know, folks, whether we have liked it or not, the cost of everything has skyrocketed. And this is one of those goose and gander bills. What's good for the goose really ought to be good for the gander. Some of these projects have gone literally from the 30,000 threshold up to where we're setting this limit now. Most of those, in fact, all of those districts out there shop these projects to get the best price. Just because they're not going to be bidding up to this new amount they're going to do everything they can to make sure they keep costs under control. I found it kind of interesting. This was one of the bills that ended up on one of the cookie cutter lists. And so I know you've gotten a few emails, the cookie cutter kind, where the same thing is stated over and over again. The easy thing is to say, well, we're not going to do this because it looks like more money. But what this bill does, folks, it allows our water and sewer districts to be held to an equal standard with our municipalities. That's only fair. There's nothing nefarious. It's just going to allow for projects up to that 75,000 threshold. You just don't have to go out for a lengthy bid process, which is going to slow things down. You've got a very limited time window to get some of these construction projects done. And so I think it's a fair bill. I hope you'll support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a question. If the good bringer of this knows when we put in 30,000, I would guess that was a long time ago. And with inflation and that, this is probably a pretty close number to go to. So I would encourage an aye vote.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good colleague from Natrona County. I think the intent of this bill is good. I don't really want to speak against the bill, but I'm on it against it just for the fact that I think, the bidding process does encourage better prices. I know that in my line of work. And this would, to me, help the government pick winners and losers in the bidding process. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Landon, you want to take us home?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yeah, just a quick answer to my friend from the Northwest. I did my best in the statute to try to find that out. And in 2015, there were some changes to that statute. I don't think they were the bid limit. I think it goes back to 1999. But I will double check that, and if the bill moves forward, I'll get back to you on that. Appreciate the comments from my friend from Natrona County. I get that, but I do think that the way costs have risen, just getting the work done, this is a bill that's going to help our water and sewer districts out there. They've got their hands full. Hope you'll support the bill. Thank you.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Case's motion, then when committee of the whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 46, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Senate File 46 has passed committee of the whole. The next Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee of the whole rise and report.
Trains are running on time.
I hear them.
You hear this? That's right.
You have heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried.
Oh, yeah. For sure. Yeah.
Will the reading clerk read the committee of the whole report?
Mr. President, your committee of the whole, having had under consideration bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. Senate File 41, laid back on general file without prejudice. Senate File 73, do pass. Senate File 20, do pass amended. Senate File 42, do pass. Senate File 95, do pass. Senate File 60, do pass. Senate File 46, do pass. Senator McEwen, Chairman.
Senator McEwen.
I move adoption of the Committee of the Whole report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carried, then the report has been adopted. Standing committee. Standing committee reports.
January 23, 2025. Mr. President, your Committee Number 1, Judiciary, to whom is referred Senate File 9, Restoration of Rights Amendments, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Aye, Senators Craigo, Crum, Kolb, and Olson. No, Senator Hicks. Senator Olson, Chairman.
Do you have messages from the House by chance?
Mr. President, following messages are from the House of Representatives dated January 23, 2025. Mr. President, House Bill 172, Repeal Gun-Free Zones and Preemption Amendments, passed the House on third reading in an amended form. Ayes 50, noes 10, excused 2. Message number 122. Mr. President, House Bill number 80, Stop ESG State Funds Fiduciary Duty Act, passed the House on third reading in an amended form. Ayes 44, noes 16, excused 2. Sincerely, Katie Talbot, House Chief Clerk.
Madam Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk.
Mr. President, I move that we stand adjourned until 10 a.m. Friday, January 24th, 2025.
Are there any announcements? Senator McEwen.
Mr. Chairman, your number 3 committee, Revenue, will meet upon noon recess tomorrow to consider the following 3 bills. Senate File 96 will finish up Wyoming Gold Act. Senate File 128, the repeal of sales tax on electricity. And we'll see how far we can get into Senate File 68, government-owned funds or lands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. President. Education Committee number 4 will meet tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock a.m. in room 110, W110 and online. We'll take a look at Senate File 62, Restrooms in Publicly Funded Schools, -2, and Senate File 86, Alternative Teaching Certificates.
Thank you. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, meets tomorrow upon noon recess, and we'll set a time, but we always try to give our members time to eat, in room 110 to hear Senate File 71, Ignition Interlock Restricted License Aggravated Homicide, and Senate File 129, Hospital Employee Drug and Alcohol Testing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Olson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee Number 1, Judiciary, will meet tomorrow upon noon recess to consider 4 Senate files. Senate File 79, District Courts Change of Venue. Senate File 107, Freedom to Work and Build Business. Senate File 115, Judicial Review of Agency Actions Limitations. And Senate File 75, Coroner Investigations, Disposition of Decedent's Property. And I will note, Mr. President, that for my committee, we are meeting in room W2, so that's a different room than we are traditionally in, so W2. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work. Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, your Minerals Committee, Minerals Business and Economic Development number 9, will meet upon noon recess Friday, January 24th in Capitol Extension Room W4 and online. We'll consider Senate File 65, Data Privacy Government Entities, Senate File 83, Large Energy Project Funding Legislative Approval, Senate File 97, Trust Code Revisions, Senate File 134, Industrial Siting Wildlife Mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Committee number 2, Appropriations, will be meeting tomorrow upon noon recess in room 113. We'll be going over Senate File 17, Carbon Dioxide Enhanced Oil Recovery, Senate File 18, Enhanced Oil Recovery Severance Tax Exemption, Senate File 51, Wyoming Telecommunications Act revisions, Senate File 55, Third-Party Filers, and Senate File 82, Omnibus Water Bill Planning. And to the honorable members on the floor, the Joint Appropriations Committee has finished the markup of the supplemental budget bill. We'll be taking a look at, we'll be getting a draft, I assume, from the LSO staff probably on Tuesday, and we'll be perhaps on the floor with it a week from tomorrow. So get prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further announcements? You've all heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The Senate will stand adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.